Good evening. I'm gonna let everyone start to trickle in, and then I'm gonna share my screen. Just a heads up, as always, guys, the presentation's being recorded, so make sure to have your microphone off, of course, unless you want to ask a question. Um, Feel free to give a shout out in the middle of the presentation or in the chat. I'll be getting to the chat at the end of the presentation just because of the presentation mode my laptop's going to be in. And we'll start in a minute. If at any point I lose connection with the presentation mode, which happened last time, just give me a shout. It is so greatly appreciated. Okay, everyone should be able to see my screen now. If you cannot, please let me know. And it's 6 o'clock on the dot, so I'm going to get started. So like I said, if anyone has a question in the middle of the presentation, please feel free to jump on in. You can interrupt me, that is not a problem in the least, or write it in the chat and I'll go through the chat at the end of the presentation, of course. So we're starting off Whole30. The Whole30 program officially tonight is or today I should say, is the start of the 30 days. And we're going to go a little into preparation for success. So in the beginning of the presentation, I'm going to be a little redundant just to make sure everyone is super clear on the information. And then we'll go into some strategies like meal prep and some information just about inflammation and whatnot. But tonight's really for you guys, especially even though it's a bit of a presentation format. I do love it when everyone has questions, because if you have a question, likely someone else does. Of course, we have the GroupMe app that if you want to participate in that, please feel free to jump in to the chat, as well as another source to address questions that are, not super individualized for in front of the group, so that everyone can be aware of the information. Of course, if it's a very personal question related to your personal medical information, please feel free to ask that on the side, of course. What's great about the GroupMe app is if you don't want to get too many notifications, you can always put it on silent and then check into it, periodically throughout the week as well. So tonight is the 629 presentation. Of course, as you see here from the Instagram posting, we'll have 2 more presentations. We'll be off next week. And then the following Monday, 7/13, we'll have our next presentation. Of course, all of these are going to be recorded. And I do really try to make it a point to send that out, right after the presentation concludes and the video uploads and gets edited to YouTube, and get it out to you guys just in case you miss it, that everyone's staying very up to date. So like we were saying, Whole30 was started by Dallas Hartwig and Melissa Hartwig. There is that podcast available here if you want to listen a little bit more into the background, but we're starting the first phase today, which is the elimination. And we'll get again into you can make this work for you. And of course, the reintroduction phase is phase 2, which is the 10 plus days after the initial 30-day elimination, where we reintroduce each food to assess, tolerance. So technically, if you are doing Whole30 the exact prescribed way, if you do quote unquote, I don't like the word cheat, but in this program, that's like the terminology that gets used, or you splurge. I usually like to say the word splurge or social splurge. Technically, you are supposed to start back at day 1, but again, make this program work for you. And the emphasis of Whole30 is really just, in our book, for this sake, is getting back to healthy habits, giving some structure during a time of year that can be riddled with a little bit of change in our schedule. I tend to call the second half of June into July insidious December, because everyone always talks about December being rich with, social splurges, but I feel like there's a lot of social things that go on during this time of year, almost more than December. So of course, you guys should be seeing my screen. I just got a little paranoid. So if you don't see it, let me know. We have the Whole30 book actually up at the front desk at Elevation. If you want to come in and look through it and utilize it, go ahead. We want to make sure you have lots of resources to refer to. So just some review. What are the Whole30 quote unquote rules? Is to temporarily avoid or eliminate, added sugar, right? Sugar naturally found in fruit. That's okay, that's fine. It's more the added sugars, which of course is now listed on labels, which is super, super helpful. Alcohol, of course, is a part of this. Grains, legumes, dairy, carrageenan or sulfites that are additives that you'll see on the ingredients labels of foods. Baked goods or processed snacks, we want to look for Whole30 approved. And if you're uncertain about a particular food item, pop that into the GroupMe chat, and we'll definitely get that addressed as you go across the 30 days. And of course, measurements are supposed to be recorded in the beginning and then not again until the very end. So you guys do have access to the InBody scale at Elevation Fitness, where Functional Nutrition RX is housed at 41 John Street. Of course, that information I had sent out in the last presentation, but I just wanted to review that, make sure that everyone is aware. Some of the fine print is certain legumes that get looped in, like green beans and peas, including like sugar snap peas, are allowed. Iodized salt is allowed. I like the Morton's brand. Per Consumer Labs, it is a lower heavy metal salt, which is reassuring. And of course, many people we find do not get enough iodine, so it is nice to have a pinch of iodized salt from time to time within your cooking, especially if you don't eat a lot of seafood or seaweed, for example. Which seaweed can be a Whole30 approved, like cracker alternative, similar to cucumbers, etc. Fruit juice is a part of the Whole30. That is also something that gets a little confusing. We want to look for 100% fruit juices as good ways to flavor things like smoothies or seltzers, or as like a little pre-workout carb. I love the Palm Wonderful brand, the blueberry, cherry, or pomegranate juices, because they're very rich in antioxidants. And of course, coconut aminos is a soy sauce alternative that is accepted. So the pancake rule with Whole30 is specific foods that fall under the quote unquote pancake rule. So this is their terminology using rule. Typically in my counseling, I try to stay away from the quote unquote rules, with everything's kind of a spectrum, but again, this is a challenge. So like pancakes that don't meet, Whole30 approved guidelines. Of course, if we're making some homemade alternatives, that's a little different. Crepes, waffles, bread, tortillas, these foods tend to fall in that like grain and added sugar category that, some people tend to have some questions with. I did provide the link if you want to learn a little bit more in depth about this. Vinegars, those are okay, like your apple cider vinegar, and botanical extracts like your lemon extract or vanilla or lavender, etc. Those are acceptable because they are alcohol based, so it's understandable why people would have questions, but it is a good natural way to add flavor to your meals without adding sugar. So the main emphasis of Whole30 is just kind of resetting back to whole foods, trying to minimize packaging and more home cooked meals. And it's also used, like we were saying previously, as an elimination diet to identify potential triggers that might not sit the best with us from especially an inflammation standpoint, which we'll get more into those mechanisms towards the end of the presentation. So it's trying to eat foods with limited ingredients, limited packaging from the earth. Aim for ingredients that you can pronounce, and when we look at it, we know what it is. It's not a term that sounds like it's made from a lab. Evo, sometimes I get questions, what does Evo mean when I write natural fats like Evo olives, nuts, seeds, avocados. Evo stands for extra virgin olive oil, or you can do virgin olive oil, avocado oil, etc. But just want to make sure everyone knows what Evo is. You never know. These are some foods that contain sulfites. So you'll see ingredients on the label saying sulfur dioxide, potassium bisulfate, potassium metabisulfate, sodium bisulfate, as you see on the screen. That should immediately flag you. But as you can see with many of these, you have the root word saying sulfite in the base. So that's an easy tell. Other foods that can tend to have sulfites in it, baked goods, soup mixes. Good thing it's warm out. We're not, hopefully not many of us are having too many, soups right now. But if you did, of course, we would do homemade with some bone broth, for example. Jams, non-homemade or not, minimally processed. Some canned foods, pickled foods, and gravies. And of course, you guys can see the list on the right-hand side of the screen. Certain dried fruits might contain sulfites, sparkling grape juice, certain vegetable juices. So we just want to make sure we're reading labels, and if we're uncertain, and especially if you're doing this from the true elimination standpoint, if you're uncertain, just ask. It's never a problem. We're happy to help out. I'm going to try to be in the group chat each evening when I get out of seeing patients. So just note that if I'm not jumping in during the middle of the day, it's just because I'm seeing patients. So I'll be doing that in the evening, or of course, Wednesdays and Thursdays, I tend to work nights and see patients. So I'll be jumping in there in the morning. So just a heads up, I will be monitoring the chat. I'm going to pop in there actually after uploading and sending everything tonight into the GroupMe. So if anyone hasn't joined yet, just because sometimes GroupMe can be a little funny, like we have it locked just to make sure there's no, strangers jumping into the chat trying to solicit or whatnot. So you do have to request to join, but I've been checking in and authorizing people into the group as they trickle in. So this is just a reminder, join the GroupMe app. That link was sent out in the last recap email that I sent, and it's also in your modules in Practice Better. Make sure to check in on your modules. I can see who is looking at the modules and who is not. So I just always like to look at that and see how many people are utilizing the materials. But a lot of it I do also send in email form, just because I know technology, sometimes people prefer one mode over another. So I do try to accommodate, all individuals. Carrageenan is another emulsifying additive that is considered non-Whole30 approved, and it can have different digestive side effects. That's part why it's not authorized. It's an emulsifier. It actually can impact your gut health and impact that mucosal endothelial lining in your intestines. And just think of it as, it sounds funny, but we are a tube open from end to end when you think of your digestive tract. So, of course, that mucosal line, that mucus that lines the skin, really is part of the doorway in which food gets absorbed or different pathogens get absorbed. So when that starts to break down, sometimes these pores that are supposed to be tiny and tight little pores start to become atrophied and larger and larger and larger, allowing for these bigger pathogens. One in particular is called lipopolysaccharides, to then get absorbed into our body and then into our bloodstream, and can be a link to some chronic disease, including heart disease. So carrageenan is also used not just as an emulsifying agent, but as a preservative and a thickener. So just be on the lookout. It is typically pretty clearly labeled in the ingredients section of various foods. But again, if we're not eating we want to try to minimize, not completely omit, but try to minimize packaged and bagged products. But typically, say if I'm eating, an apple, there isn't going to be, carrageenan in the apple. So it does come from red seaweed or Irish moss, but again, it's not the greatest for our body. It can sometimes be in nut milks or different meat products or yogurts, for example, or protein shakes. Just to plug, because I do get questions whenever we run a Whole30 program, some protein shakes like Only What You Need can be a great option. The Epic bars, the That's It bars, and the RX bars are another quick alternatives too. The Only What You Need powder is another good option too as a protein powder. Only What You Need stands for OWYN. So many people are familiar with OWYN when you see that on the label. It's at Target often, Walmart, Whole Foods, most major grocery stores. They'll even sell it at like a 7-Eleven, different convenience stores. So, like we said last time, make Whole30 work for you. Because we do acknowledge that this is a time of year where some individuals may find it more conducive to do the elimination diet, where some other individuals might just want to focus in on healthy habits, focusing on abundance of, healthier foods like fruits and vegetables, lean proteins, fresh herbs and spices, etc. So make Whole30 work for you. Also meaning if all right, I've tried eliminating dairy in the past and I learned that it still sits good with my body, or I know that beans and legumes sit well with my body, and I really just want to focus on eliminating maybe like soy, added sugars, and alcohol during this time, that works. Because at the end of the day, you want to see it as a spectrum, right? Like we're moving that dial just slowly along the spectrum towards being our happiest, healthiest selves, right? So any step in the right direction towards being a happier, healthier individual, including more of these, naturally grown foods, lean proteins, of course, is always great. I don't like to come from like the restrictive mindset, but it's also always great to say, okay, I'm drinking, normally I have 1 to 2 alcoholic beverages per week and now I'm having none. That's wonderful. Or, normally I'm catching myself like snacking on some added sugars at night and now I'm not doing that. That is also wonderful. So if you want to set 1 to 3 SMART goals stand for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, or I like to say realistic and time bound goals, SMART goals. Setting 1 to 3 of those goals can help to make this more action oriented for many individuals. And I did put some example SMART goals below. And of course, the time would be, the 30 days. It's something realistic to check in on at the end of each week and say, okay, well, how well am I adhering to this? What helped me and what did I get a little tripped up on this week? So then I could focus in on what I got tripped up on this week when I prepare, for the following week. It's that athlete mindset saying, all right, this might not be going well, but I'm going to look at it, address it, come up with a plan, and adapt and overcome. We're not going to dwell and, get emotional. It's more just what's not working as effectively. How do I make it work more effectively? And then how do I, put that into place? So of course, if you're struggling in any way, communication is always key. We did recommend a multivitamin just in case. Some people tend to ask those questions. So that link is also in your previous recap email and in your module 1 in your Practice Better platform. I did want to touch a little on summer because we do have July 4th coming up this weekend, and I would be uh, blinded to not acknowledge that, right? Because we want to look at ahead and try to plan and foresee some barriers that we might run into, and then come up with a plan of how we're going to overcome them. So we're going to touch on some of these key pieces here today, and then over the weekend, I did take some time to make another recipe packet just for, the tis the season for, barbecues and grilling. So I am going to send that out to everyone tonight as well. So everyone could have a happy, healthy, and well planned, July 4th this weekend celebrating the 250. So talking about, social occasions, this is something that comes up, all along the calendar year, and are just good considerations for holidays, baby showers, communions, going out to eat, just points to consider. You want to avoid saving calories for later in the day. So, say the event is taking place at, 2 p.m., we still want to try to prioritize, especially protein and fiber earlier in the day. Have a nourishing, balanced breakfast in the morning, and maybe even a snack or a lunch beforehand, depending on the food being served and when you think that might be coming out. I always like to recommend keeping a snack in your bag just in case. We've been to events where we show up and then the food's not coming out for like 3 more hours, and then by that time we're starving. So we want to prevent getting hangry. I like to call it the hunger fullness scale, where 0 is I am starving, I am so hungry, I can eat anything. 3 is, I'm getting hungry, I could eat. And then as we progress upwards on the scale, 7 is I am satiated, I feel good, I'm not stuffed. And then 10, I like to say, is Thanksgiving stuff. So we want to try to eat when we're at about a 3 that I could eat, and we're more likely to end at a 7 satiated when we start at that 3. But if I'm saving up my calories and I'm, super hungry and I'm at a 0, I'm more likely to eat quickly, grab things impulsively, blood sugar gets low, I'm not as focused, and more likely to end at a 10, that I'm overtly full feeling. So really try to avoid saving up calories, because we do tend to overindulge later in the day, and just trying to keep it simple. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, 1 to 2 snacks. Um, we want to take up space. We're not trying to really reduce, calories dramatically, or starve ourselves in any way. I think that is one of the most important keys to a healthy diet that people tend to skip over, like not having breakfast. Is very, very common. And then many wonder, why am I, snacking at night or really hungry or having that 3 p.m. slump? Well, if you think about it, there's 3 main meals in the day. And if we're not having breakfast, we're missing close to a third of our nutrition. So of course, don't skip breakfast. Don't save up calories. Please, please, please. Have a balanced snack before, like I was saying. You could do the Cocoa June dairy-free Greek yogurt if you are, especially cutting out dairy, maybe with some fruit in it, or some nuts or nut butter is a great snack, or make a protein shake or a smoothie beforehand, or some turkey chomps and some fruit. But keep it simple, of course. Just make sure to have a snack before you go. And at gatherings, try to build up your plate around the protein first. So, for example, at a barbecue, if we're having, like a portobello bun burger and a little bit of some rutabaga fries or carrot fries on the side, or salad on the side, you're first picking your protein. Then you want to consider your veggies and other fiber rich carbs. So, like a potato salad, you could do it the German way with some spicy brown mustard, or use the dairy-free Greek yogurt as the mayo alternative. Or of course, the Primal Kitchen mayo is Whole30 approved. So protein, try to pick first, then some produce and some fiber rich, starchier, carbs, to really balance your plate. You have a protein, you've got carbs, and then a little fat, of course, can be in the meat, or extra virgin olive oil with a vinegar on the salad. That extra virgin olive oil could be a great healthy fat, or some avocado. So just really try to keep it simple. Do I have protein? Do I have some produce? Do I have, a starch and maybe a fat? Those four categories. Treat it like a little mental checklist, just to consider mindfully before, we jump in. Do I have my big four? My protein, my produce, a little starchy carb, and some healthy fat. We'll go a little bit more into this, of course, too. We want to try to eat slow, savor, and enjoy the experience. Of course, if it's social, it's always great, because we're eating, maybe like putting, a fork or the burger down in between bites to really taste and savor the food, conversate with loved ones. When we eat quicker, it takes that vagal nerve some time to travel up to the brain to communicate, hey, we're full. And I know I've eaten so quick before that you just feel like smacked with that I'm stuffed feeling. So eating slow is super important. If you do tend to be a fast eater and you know someone that's with you at the social engagement that tends to eat slow, try to, time yourself with them. Just keep mindful of them and their plate. It's always great when you're going out to eat with a loved one that tends to eat a little slower, and we don't want to, finish our plate dramatically, before them. So, aligning with them can be helpful. If we're distracted at meals, like say eating in front of the TV, it takes away from the experiences of the five senses of your meal. Taste, smell, of course, is a big one. Thinking about where that food came from. Um, that also helps us to eat more mindfully, be present, and savor our food. Of course, like the classic saying, a prayer or a peek or a pit before meals is actually a very good grounding technique to help, present us before the meal, express, gratitude for the meal and like what went into it. It can be a way to help, slow us down. There's also tools called the raisin meditation, which is fun to do with loved ones. Um, but you guys can look into that, and I'll put that in the recap. Alcohol, depending on how you are adjusting with the Whole30 program. Of course, alcohol is not included in Whole30, but if you are engaging with some alcohol or whatnot, it's always best paired with food, especially protein and a little carbs to prevent blood sugar swings or overeating. Stay hydrated throughout the day and during events. It's getting hotter. So many of us, of course, um, might feel like we're having cravings, and there's multiple reasons behind having cravings just naturally throughout the day, whether doing Whole30 or not. If you're eating enough, if you're sleeping enough and you're hydrated, you're helping to control cravings from a physiological standpoint, because your hypothalamus tells your body, hey, I'm tired, hey, I'm hungry, hey, I'm thirsty. And sometimes those communication lines get a little crossed, so our body doesn't mind if we get water from food or water from beverage. So, of course, if you are dehydrated, you might feel a little bit more cravings. So that's part where that have a glass of water before you eat concept comes from. But I think it's always wonderful in the summer, any time of year, but especially in the summer, keep a water bottle on hand. I always joke around and say keys, phone, wallet, water bottle. So, one meal or occasion, however, in the grand scheme, does not derail progress. If you're doing Whole30 from a strict elimination style, of course, it does mean, we got to try to go back to square one, start day one again. If you're doing this from like a mindfulness standpoint, it's acknowledging, there's about 21 meals in a week when you do 3 times 7 between breakfast, lunch, dinner. If you're having one off meal in the grand scheme, it's not, and I don't even like to say off meal, right? Like just a social splurge. It doesn't derail progress when you think of the percentage of the week. It's more about consistency, consistency, consistency over time. That part of doing the Whole30 is nice because it gives you like a reset of doing something a little strict. And then you're trying to maintain some of the habits that you started to build over Whole30 in the subsequent months. You want to try to return to your normal routine, the next meal, the next snack, the next opportunity. If you do have, a splurge that you might not be the happiest about, or maybe you wanted to have it because, I've been working hard. I want to have, a little something, we don't have to make up for it and the next day, minimize our calories or not eat breakfast, because the cycle does, sometimes continue when that happens, right? Like, say I had a big social splurge last night and then didn't have breakfast this morning, and now I'm more likely to crave again tonight and eat, bigger portions or whatnot. So try just to get back to your normal routine at the next moment that you do go to eat. And then if eating later than usual, focus on balanced portions rather than perfection, and really try to eat every 3 to 4 hours, which does tend to fall into the schema of breakfast, lunch, dinner, 1 to 2 snacks. If you're looking for some kind of time restricted pattern, trying to eat within a 12-hour window is always a great place to start. aka, start eating at 8 a.m., stop eating by 8 p.m., based on your, workout schedule and your daily routine. So, of course, beach, pool, and boating, all things summer. So, we wanted to highlight the snackle boxes during this time. It's a great way to plan ahead, have snacks on hand. Of course, I love those little Tupperwares from Amazon on the middle left. On the right, you see like a whole, shrimp platter and whatnot. That's a more designer looking one, I'd say. There's you have like a Bloody Mary mocktail, we'd say, in the middle, but you can make it work for you. Love bringing these to the beach and, maybe a smoothie or something in the morning for breakfast, and then having some options like those snacks for, before you go home for lunch. So the snackel box, you want to think of like fruit, some veggies, of course, maybe like a dip of some kind, like a guacamole. You could break it up and do like those mini little turkey or chicken jerky options in there, make it fun. Of course, going to the beach, we have some mocktails, of course, in at least one mocktail in every packet. And of course, fruit and herb infusions are wonderful. I love to highlight frozen fruit and fresh herbs is a good way to flavor water. Electrolytes, of course, can help. And of course, the next slide, I'm going to have some other alternatives coming up in the alcohol section. When you're making your plate, we want to think about that USDA My Plate. I know the food pyramid has now surpassed the My Plate, but it's still relevant as a tool when building your plate. And of course, you see dairy in the top corner. I personally like to use the example of water instead of dairy, and think of your plate as, half your plate fruits and vegetables, 1/4 if you're doing beans could be beans, or if you're doing the true elimination diet like peas and potatoes are a great example of some starches, or some squash you could do, and then of course your protein. If the concept of making half your plate produce seems a little overwhelming, think of a peace sign and break it into thirds. Whole30 does put out these great templates to really help with building the meal. So Whole30 does recommend eating 3 to 4 meals per day. So it could be breakfast, lunch, dinner, 1 to 2 snacks, or instead of having snacks, having, a fourth meal. Typically a snack is about the size of a half of a meal. So that's where that does come from. We want to base each meal around 1 to 2 palm-sized servings. Of course, your palm is about 3 ounces of protein, or about 21 grams. Many individuals need around, 30 for females, 35, 40 plus for males, especially if you're strength training. So gone is the day of just the palm of 3 ounces. It depends on what you're having in the plate, like so on the plate. So if there's nuts or seeds, that also helps to bump up total protein. But if you are having a lean protein like chicken or fish or shrimp, you can try to aim for about your palm to about your hand size, depending on your individual, protein needs. That's a good way to see it and think about it, especially when you're out and about and might not have access to a scale or packaging that details the amount. After, picking the protein, fill the rest of your plate with veggies, right? So part of why we like to offer Whole30 during this time of year is it is a really wonderful time of year here in New York for fresh produce, right? So we want to take advantage of all the fresh produce that is available to us at the farmers markets and the local farms. I did provide some later in the presentation as well. Of course, throughout your day, add 1 to 2 servings of fruit. If you're a very active individual, especially if you run or do more cardio endurance based work, maybe even upwards to 3 servings of fruit per day. Fruit is great as a side with breakfast or lunch, or just as a snack or part of a dessert, typically. Then lastly, we want to add fat to our meal. So oils, cooking fats like avocado oil, we were saying the clarified butter or ghee, or of course we can lean on, some other oils from time to time, especially though the olive oil and the avocado oil should typically be our primary cooking oils. That's usually about 1 to 2 thumb-sized portions for the average individual at meals. Of course, olives can count in that too. So Whole30 recommends, if that's your choice of dietary fat for that meal, 1 to 2 open handfuls. And you could see the images on the left detailing the portions that they do put out. Nuts and seeds, when I'm counseling, I actually really try to stay away from using the term a small handful, because nuts and seeds can be very dense in caloric value, but healthy nutrients. Like if I take a full handful like this, that's a big difference from, a hand size amount as so. So I like to, I know it sounds kind of funny. I do like to recommend in terms of like shot glasses, or like about, 1/3 of a cup. It's more measurable. It's more understanding to the eye. So 1 to 2 shot glasses, or about a 1/3 cup, can be more realistic. Avocado, typically the portion sizes recommended is 1/2 to 1 full. Of course, if you're working one-on-one with a registered dietitian, which we do offer at the practice, and if we do accept your insurance for group challenges, programs, seminars, we likely accept your insurance for one-on-one nutrition counseling. And many people typically do not even have a copay, which is amazing, and it's unlimited for most individuals. So take advantage of it. We do like to calculate needs for individuals, and ask your dietitian about how much should I have in my meal for my particular needs and activity, etc. This is just a general tool that Whole30 does like to put out to help individuals with this, especially because it's not a very tracking in terms of tracking in a food journal type of a program. So they do have one for our more carnivorous ones and ones for our more plant-based patients and clients. So of course, if you're doing the plant-based version of Whole30, meaning you're not having, meats and fish, beans, lentils, and peas, and minimally processed forms of soy are encouraged as ways to help meet the dietary protein needs. So this is just good to think about, of course, and of course, similar to Whole30, for those who do have meat, of course, whole vegetables, fruit, plant-based fats, herbs, spices, and seasonings are highly encouraged. Foods that grow from the ground. These are just some mocktail alternatives. I'm a big fan of Seedlip. It's a clean hydrostat option, and it does have a nice flavor, and it still does feel like you're having, an adult beverage. It's made with more plant botanicals, however. And if you buy the 3-pack, it does come with a cute little cocktail book, which is nice. These are just some other mocktail brands, especially thinking about, July 4th this weekend. I know that could be a holiday that people tend to have like a beverage on the beach or at the air show, etc. These are just some great alternatives that are alcohol free. And Pesci, I like Pesci the most. They do have a little bit of adaptogens in them to give either like an uplift or an unwinding sensation. These were just some brands mentioned previously that I want to make sure some people see if they didn't get a chance. I know I was saying earlier, some bars, another bar brand is Larabar. You just want to double check certain flavors with Larabar, especially too. Some flavors are approved and but not all of them. So just a lot of Whole30 really helps us to create the habit of just like checking in on the label and the ingredients. If you're reading the label of the most common foods you tend to eat, it does help us to just stay more mindful throughout our day. And hopefully that habit lingers on after Whole30. It's just a coming back to good things that we do. Sometimes we stray away and then come back. These are just some other resources as well. I encourage people to reach out in the GroupMe chat, but we did make that Amazon store link. I placed it here again. It's in module 1, and the recap email, some other, the Whole30 approved link is there too, which is like a search engine, and of course other resources across social media, and different wellness, blogs, Instagrams, websites, etc. Next, we want to tap on meal preparation. So I know we started talking a bit about this last session and the different steps for meal prep, but just we want to think realistically, right? Like we said, everything's a spectrum, and we just want to be moving along that spectrum in that more favorable direction. It's the same concept with meal preparation. So if we're someone that tends to plan a few recipes and snacks for the week, a grocery list, maybe we're trying to go towards planning a couple more options, or cooking and pre-chopping our produce and prepping our produce when we get home. What's in one more new step that we can try to introduce? If we're someone that you know might grab a snack in advance but not really planning other meals, it's not realistic to think about, I'm going to plan each of my breakfast, lunch, snacks, everything for the exact 30 days. Maybe it's about starting to make more of a grocery list, a couple recipes for the week, so you're just moving that dial along a little bit steadily, of course, throughout the 30 days, and checking in on your progress and saying, okay, where am I planning well? Where do I need to, plan a little better? Is it breakfast and lunch, but dinner's covered? Am I planning for cravings? We do put sweet swaps in each of the recipes, so it's good to think about planning for cravings. So when it does awry, you already have something available versus the impulsive, I'm going to grab this real quick, which is just human nature. Some tips and tricks to get it done: multitask at the level you are comfortable with. For example, if we're baking some salmon in the oven, maybe we can do another tray of asparagus, or big grilling season. So maybe we could be first grilling up some veggies on the grill and in the grill basket, let those, finish off. And maybe we're going to put like a sirloin steak and, some shrimp foil packets and some, depending on how big your grill is, and a couple of pieces of marinated grilled chicken on, so we can bulk prep at once. So we're not, having to turn the grill on and off across different days to get these done. Try to make the most of your time. That's something that I'll call double dinner night, where, for example, say Monday, we did that, and now we have a lot, prepped, and that can carry us through to Tuesday, because Tuesday might be a busy night running around with the kids between, different sports or games or extracurricular activities. That, okay, we have something prepped. And then maybe Wednesday we'll do like another double dinner night, where maybe we're making a stir fry in one pan, and then sauteing some chicken and veg, um, or maybe cooking in the oven while we're sauteing some chicken and veg on the stove top. Maybe we're baking some salmon in the oven. It's always really helpful to think of the French term mise en place. So it's wonderful to get organized first, get everything out that you need before you cook, so that when, things start rolling, you have what you need, things are pre-portioned for the recipe, and you can just add and follow along the recipe, versus, oh no, now this is done, but I still have to cut up the veggies, and now I'm not timing it right. Like, get everything set and organized first, and then move forward. This also applies to the kitchen. So it's always good. I love looking on Pinterest and Amazon at organization tools for the refrigerator or the cabinets, or different dry erase menu boards. Or some people are using Skylight now, which is a more digital platform board that links to an app that can coordinate like schedules and grocery lists and appointments and the kids' practices and extracurriculars all in one informational hub for the family. So it's like a giant shared calendar. So just trying to get organized, that little investment in organization can save you a lot of time on the back end. Time audits are always like a fun exercise. So calculating time for 1 week using 168 hours, aka 24 hours times 7 days. And think about the things that you normally do. If you want to calculate 8 hours of sleep, of course, so immediately we're going to cut off 112 hours. if you're working about, say, like 50 hours per week, of course, times, 5 days, 10 hours per day, that's 62 hours. So we're going to subtract 62 hours. Maybe you're commuting 2 hours per day, say, that's, about 52 hours in the week. Then maybe thinking about, grocery shopping 3 hours during the week. So we're going to subtract 3 hours from that 52. Now we have 49 hours. Think about meal prepping, maybe about like 3.5 hours per week. That brings us down to 45.5 hours. Consider running errands, social engagements with family, friends, loved ones, physical activity. Of course, that can leave us with about 9 hours of self-care time. So really think about, if you're falling short on free time, think about where time can be capitalized more. I know this is very simplistic because it doesn't account for, oh, well, my son just texted me and now spontaneously the whole, plan changed and I have to run up and drop this off, and I wasn't thinking about that during the day. But a little time audit can sometimes be useful to give perspective on how much time we might actually really have to engage in these activities. These are other organizational tools that I will attach in the email and put in the module. I love the weekly meal plan cheat sheet here. You see Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc., each of the days of the week. And then there's 3 lines underneath. I like to write BLD under each one. So for Monday, it would be like B for the first line, L for the middle line, D for the final line, representing breakfast, lunch, dinner. Maybe first start with planning, 2 to 4 different breakfasts, skip over lunch, plan a couple of dinners, and then think about, okay, if we're doing, a stir fry or a sheet pan meal or a grilling night Monday, those leftovers can become lunch for Tuesday. Can I repurpose that, or am I okay, having the same thing on Tuesday and then doing something maybe a little different Tuesday night? The grocery list can be made from this. So of course, it's great to consider what you already have in the fridge or the cabinets that you want to use up and try to coordinate that around different recipes. So of course, we have the recipe packets that we send out, but Whole30 website, Whole30, of course, social media does have a lot of other recipes. You are not limited to just the packets that we put out. We give that as, of course, a helpful tool just to save you some of this planning. Of course, make your grocery list, and of course, this will be available as a 8.5 by 11 print off if you want to print one per each week of the challenge to really invest those 15 minutes, touch base with the family, who's home what night, who's helping to cook or doing what, when are we running around, or are we, maybe trying to eat out on Wednesday nights? We're not going to plan to make dinner, but just thinking ahead. On the right is the weekly schedule breakdown cheat sheet. Just to have it fit on the screen, it cuts off at 4, but that cheat sheet goes all the way into the evening. Some people might find the half-hour intervals to be a little overwhelming, but I'd rather be detail-oriented versus lacking detail. You could make this work for you. There's many different, planners out there, but of course, thinking about your day and all the things you got to get done, maybe writing a to-do list, and then trying to plug that to-do list into a timetable for the day, seeing how realistic that to-do list is. But of course, if we don't get to it one day, we don't want to feel too guilty or feel bad about it. We try to just move it to the next day. It's just a tool to help keep us organized. As we know, sometimes we can plan the day and then things can completely change. Or, of course, often it does help us to keep us pretty in line with our intentions from when we started the day to how we want to end the day. I like that it has a focus section on the top too, of what is your main focus for that day. These are just some local farms and farmers markets that we wanted to highlight, especially given the time of year. We want to get people out and about trying different foods. Maybe, there's foods that you haven't ever had before, like a jackfruit, for example, and you see that out, or you see some tomatillos out and you really want to try some new things. This is a good way to get exposed to those different foods. Of course, social outings. if you're trying to avoid, sitting down and going out to eat, which is never, no, there's nothing wrong with it. But if you're like, I want to do something different, be the one to set the plan with your loved ones and your friends. Like, hey, let's go to Patty's Berries out east and go and pick berries where they have some homemade floral arrangements and leaves and wreaths. Sorry. Of course, you could stop at Sang Lee Farms. They also, Sang Lee Farms is wonderful. They are a CSA that drops off across Long Island, but they have their own farm store, of course, there. You'll see them in a lot of farmers markets as well. Richter's Orchard's more local, along with, of course, Kerber's Farm over in Huntington. Of course, feel free to share different farms or farm stands that you really love. I know there's some great ones in Sayville in the group chat. Sharing is caring, of course. Next, we want to go into inflammation, as Whole30 is an anti-inflammatory diet plan, right? So as part of the elimination diet, it's trying to remove a lot of the common foods that tend to cause inflammation. So many of us have heard the term anti-inflammatory diet, or been told we got to reduce inflammation and focus on that. But what is inflammation, right? It gets used so broadly. So inflammation can be really helpful. It's when that light switch is activated and turned on long term or chronically, that can really deplete from the body. So it's a vital part of our immune system that signals to heal and repair damaged tissues or defend against foreign invaders, including bacteria or viruses. So it is a naturally occurring process. If inflammation goes on for too long, that's when it can become problematic, or it's considered a chronic systemic illness, i.e., heart disease, cancer, rheumatoid arthritis. Anything saying itis at the end of the word typically connotes inflammation. But what's the difference between acute, more like short term, or chronic inflammation? So acute is me being silly this weekend and going for a run, not in trail shoes, in different running shoes, and rolling my ankle, right? So now my ankle is a little swollen. That's my body activating the immune system. There might be some like swelling or redness or heat and some tenderness or some pain. It's very localized. That's our body coming in to help us and clear the damaged tissue and bring in nutrients to help with healing and recovery. Where that's very short term, it's under typically 3 months is considered acute. Or say I, had accidentally gotten a little cut and you have some redness around the wound. That can be, of course, infection, but that can also be inflammation of those immune cells coming in to fight off foreign pathogens and invaders. So that's a good thing that protects us. Chronic is typically labeled about like 3 months or longer. It's a long-term response. It's usually not as noticeable, right? And it can have whole body effects. It's persistent, low grade inflammation. So, traumatic stress and depression is actually considered a chronic inflammatory condition. Diet can significantly impact this. Other diseases that connote chronic inflammation include obesity, diabetes, and cancer. Heart disease, of course, plaque building up in the arteries, can connote chronic inflammation. Chronic infections is another sign as well. So, food sensitivities can sometimes impact this as well, especially in the gut. If there's some inflammation going on in the gut, that can be measured by not by IgE antibodies, but sometimes it can be a little harder to measure. You can run different labs like ESR is a biomarker that tells you a little bit about gut inflammation, or interleukin 6, or one of my favorites to run is C-reactive protein, often covered by insurance, which can tell you a bit about inflammation systemically in the body. There's high sensitivity, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to pick up more things more easily. Like if I got, dental work done, or rolled my ankle or something like that, sprained my ankle, might pick that up. Where cardiac C-reactive protein picks up more of that chronic inflammation. So it's just good to know. So when you talk to your doctor, you are informed and can ask for that. It can involve multiple mechanisms when it comes to food sensitivities, which is what makes food sensitivities a little complicated. It can be governed by the innate or the adaptive immune pathways, which we'll get to what that means later in subsequent slides. And of course, the that with of course food sensitivities versus food allergies. Food sensitivities are more, we eat this and there can be a delayed reaction, even up to 72 hours. Signs can be bloating, joint pain, IBS related symptoms, tiredness, eczema, low mood or fatigue, headache, weight gain. So it's kind of broad because there's a lot of things that can perpetuate those signs. It's not, deadly, of course, right? Like a food allergy is more, acutely uh, life threatening. But some most common sensitivities can be wheat or gluten, right? So that's part of cutting out grains and certain starches, milk or dairy, corn, sugar. I know it says eggs on there, but that's been kind of ruled out. Or, of course, like alcohol, especially. Alcohol is also a major carcinogen. Many people are not aware of that, so I do always like to mention that just so that people are aware. Where food allergies is going to be more of an immediate reaction, right? Typically 2 hours or less. It typically develops at younger ages, where food sensitivities can happen across the lifespan. Of course, with food allergies, it can be even more immediately inflammatory, like how it can impact the airways. Of course, digestion, you might have symptoms of nausea, vomiting as well. With food allergies, it's of course more testable versus food sensitivities. Food sensitivities are typically ruled out with an elimination diet. There are different tests out there too, but they are not the most accessible always, and they're not perfect. So elimination diets are one of the best ways to figure out if you do have, food sensitivities. And of course, some of the most common allergens include peanuts, dairy, shellfish, finfish, eggs, and even sesame has been added to that list. Soy is also on that list, and wheat. So it's called the Big Nine. They're the most common allergens, and if someone does have a food allergy, it's actually covered as part of the ADA. So certain, restaurants, institutional food systems need to help to accommodate for these allergens versus food sensitivities are not covered under the ADA. So what is this? What's going on in my body if I do have different food sensitivities, right? So there's usually a triggering mechanism like a food or a chemical, right? And then that causes our immune system to be more like, you see it says cellular activation. So it can activate different immune molecules like eosinophils, basophils, lymphocytes, etc. And that causes a mediator release, which are cytokines. Those are measurable. Interleukins, like I mentioned, interleukin 6, TNFs like TNF alpha, chemokines, going a little in depth here. Histamines, many people might be hearing about low histamine diets, right? So it triggers a mediator release, and those mediators can cause damage to our body, like tissue damage, DNA damage, edema or swelling, excess mucus, increased gut permeability, like breaking down that gut layer, which can contribute to different signs, symptoms, or issues that might be going on in the body. So some other medical conditions where food sensitivities can play a primary or a secondary role are listed here. So this is just good to look at. So especially if you do have one of these conditions and you're doing Whole30, it can help to check in on the different signs and symptoms associated with these conditions and see, how well it's being managed during the course of these 30 days. as a way of more naturally helping to control them in conjunction with modern medicine, of course, and recommendations from your medical doctor as well. Like fibromyalgia is a big one, and like inflammatory arthritis is a big one. But even depression, people don't tend to correlate. And I like to highlight that the gut and the brain are highly linked. It's a two-way street. The bacteria in your microbiome, in your intestines, communicate up to the brain, and the brain communicates to them through the vagal nerve. So check in with that, right? That's part why, if you haven't done so already, it's still not too late. We did attach those symptom questionnaires to the first module, that if you want to fill that out before and after the 30 days as a good way of seeing, okay, how well did this help to manage these different signs or symptoms, can be a really useful tool, because sometimes individuals might not have realized how not so great they were feeling until they feel better. So we don't want to kick ourselves and say, darn, I wish I did this, earlier. Try to take a couple moments to get that done. Of course, if you want to keep that private or share that with your dietitian, that is your choice. It is your, personal information. But if you're working with a dietitian one-on-one, I think share it. I think that communication is super important. And remember, you are covered under HIPAA, of course, when you share that during sessions. So, making connections, like we're saying, weight status can be linked to inflammation, mental health, gut health. So, those are big three to really consider when you're doing the Whole30 challenge. Of course, doing Whole30 increases the nutritional quality of the diet. So if you're taking in more fresh produce, you're taking in more mediators that, say, for example, fresh fruits and vegetables are going to contain more antioxidants that help to combat the damage of some of these other foods or sensitivities that can be more bothersome, right? Eating healthy fats like olive oil, super rich in antioxidants. Probiotics can be helpful for the gut. Activity could be, it can be inflammatory at first, and then is overall long-term anti-inflammatory. So just thinking about not just the diet, but the lifestyle, right? Adequate sleep is the unsung hero. So common features of diet-induced inflammation. I did already go over this, so this is something just to look over. But of course, with doing Whole30 and doing the elimination diet, you're helping to prevent different molecules that could be more inflammatory in nature from being released in the body, which then can cause damage to different tissues. This I had already touched on, but it's just a good visual example and information, of course, to look in on. Something to think about is gluten sensitivity or non-celiac gluten intolerance is more and more common. Someone can have a sensitivity to gluten and not have celiac disease. So one of the best ways to find out if you do have a gluten sensitivity is to eliminate gluten, which is when you're eliminating a lot of the grains and these processed foods. That's part of Whole30 essentially. So indirectly you are reducing gluten intake. So think about that when you're doing the reintroduction phase of, okay, gluten intolerance is, 6 to 8 times more prevalent than celiac disease. And it's not really the easiest to just test and diagnose. Like I said, it's done with an elimination diet. Some symptoms of gluten sensitivity can include brain fog, diarrhea, anxiety, bloating, fatigue, chronic headaches, sometimes like a moodiness some patients will describe, or abdominal pain or fatigue when having these foods. So it is good to touch on that. So the difference between non-celiac gluten sensitivity and celiac disease is an autoimmune condition. And when individuals with celiac disease consume gluten, it can actually atrophy and damage the villi in the intestines that are responsible for helping to absorb nutrients. So they're like little finger-like projections that have pores all along them. And if someone is having gluten, it will start to atrophy those villi, make them shrink smaller and smaller. So there's less surface area to really absorb nutrients. And lifelong, it can, if untreated by following a gluten-free diet, it can actually impact an individual's lifespan. Where non-celiac gluten sensitivity, the immune system can still be involved, but the mechanism is still a little unclear. A lot of it is thought to have to do with inflammation along the GI tract, but it's not as immediate as you would see with celiac disease. Of course, a gluten-free diet is a way to help treat that. And if you want to go more in depth, you can look in at the graphic to the right. But there's a difference in that celiac disease can be tested with, an intestinal biopsy or, of course, drawing antibodies in the blood, where non-celiac gluten sensitivity is typically diagnosed more so with an elimination diet. If you cut it out and you feel better, of course, that can be a sign. Typically, cutting out for 30 to 90 days is a good way to tell. And then I just want to do some housekeeping. Of course, tonight's presentation today is June 29th. It's the official start of the 30 days. So the 30 days is going to run till the end of July on the 28th. So we have now officially started that process. We're going to be off next week from meeting. So if you do have a more pressing, question or concern, post that in the chat or ask one-on-one, of course, reach out to us at the office. We can be called at 631-204-3375. That number can also be texted, and we could also be emailed at info@functionalnutritionrx. However, we do have the group meet chat as well for questions that might also influence the entire group that are not very personal. After the presentation on the 13th, so not next Monday, the following Monday is when we're meeting next. After that, we'll have another week off in between, and then we'll celebrate our success at the end of July and talk about the reintroduction phase. I'm going to release the recipes on Thursdays, so you guys have time to prepare on your weekends before the official start of each week. So I consider Monday, the start of each week, just based on, today's start date. So just keep an eye out there so you guys have time to review those recipes. I'm also going to send out that bonus packet to help with July 4th coming up. And I do want to ask if anyone has any questions and also say thank you. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can check the chat. But if you want to jump in, turn your microphone on and ask a question, we are here for that. Does anyone have any questions? I'm going to pop into the chat. I do like Relight, but yeah, it does have stevia. I can get back to you. I want to say just ingredients, but I just want to double check myself. So I actually will put that in the group me, and I'll also add that into the email sent out. So Helen, that's actually a really great question. So I will put that out there. And Diane, Golden Acres Organic Farm in Jamesport, great shout out. You do the CSA there, awesome. And then they're also at Bayshore, so that's good to know for anybody. It's always nice to take a trip out east. A lot of the farms also do information sessions. I know Sangley, that's why I keep plugging them, because I'll personally go to their like herbology classes. They talk, they'll have sessions where you make different, dried teas, and you walk the farm and they point out the different herbs so that you can learn how to identify them. But of course, a lot of places offer different options. I know it's not Whole30, but Kerber's does a lot of sourdough making classes they offer. So that's a great, social thing to do with loved ones when you're trying to, do something a little different, something a little more seasonal. So Golden Acres Organic Farm, check them out as well. Check out your local farmers markets. But does anyone have any other questions for me? All right. So just a big thank you for jumping in live. I always really appreciate that when everyone's, actively participating. I hope that everyone has a great night. If you're viewing this after and you're actively participating that way, thank you for checking in and viewing the presentation. Don't be a stranger. Ask questions. I know I'm like a broken record with that, but always here to support. And have a wonderful, wonderful evening and a very, very happy 4th of July, guys. Seriously, enjoy your weekend, and I'm going to send that out shortly. Um, Bye, guys. Aw, so sweet. Thank you, Diane. Aw, thank you, Tima and Carolyn. You're so sweet. Aw, thanks, Chrissy and Helen. You guys are awesome. All right. Be well, guys. Aw, thank you. I love seeing, I love all the emojis. So cute. Bye, guys. Have a great night.